Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode. So in today's episode, we're going to show you the 3 things that you're going to need to know when you move from auto to manual shooting. Okay, so the 3 things that you need to know when you're going to move from auto to manual is your shutter speed, your f-stop or your depth of field, and your ISO. Now there's a quick cheat for you to know whether you're perfectly exposed, and that is your light meter. Some cameras have the light meter over here, some have it over here in a horizontal position, and some you can't even see it on the viewfinder, but you can see it in the electronic viewfinder. If you look through this little peephole when you take photos, you will see this in the bottom or in the side. Now basically what this light meter does is it tells you whether you are over or underexposed. So there's a plus sign, which means if you have little lines going towards the plus sign, you are overexposed. If you have little lines going to the minus sign, you are underexposed. To show you a quick example of that, if I increase my shutter speed over here, it's now going to take, the shutter is now going to close faster, so it's letting in less light, so I'm underexposing my photo here. So if I take the photo, it looks like that. And if I'm going to decrease the shutter speed, so I'm going to take a slower, the shutter is going to take longer to close, so it's letting in more light. But now I am overexposing my photo, so the photo will look like this. And if I want to perfectly expose it, I need to move towards this 0 and be perfectly in the middle, and my photo will look like this. And that is a perfectly exposed photo, according to the light meter on the camera. Okay, so now that you know this cheat, let's start with ISO. So the lower your ISO is, the better your picture quality will be. Whether you're taking photo or video, your picture quality will be best if you shoot in lower ISO. If you increase the ISO to let more light into your camera, your picture quality will not look that good at all, because it will introduce grain. Now what is grain? Grain is something that they call it noise or camera noise, which means it is making all those tiny little black dots on your footage, which you don't want there. Sometimes you can tolerate it, like when you're taking photos or video in a very dark situation, but you still need to get the photo or the video out, and you have no other option than to raise your ISO. Now every camera has a different native setting on ISO, and where it performs best is different for each camera. So let me show you. If I go back to 100 ISO, and then I move my shutter speed and my f-stop, now I'm perfectly exposed. So you understand that ISO, the lower the number, the less grain you'll get in your photos and the better quality your photos and videos will be. But if you increase the ISO, because you need some extra light, which you can't otherwise obtain by these 2 numbers, then you're welcome to up your ISO, but you will have to deal with the noise in the photo or the video. Now that we understand how ISO works, we can leave it in the setting of 100, because of these lighting conditions is quite enough for us to shoot in 100, except if I'm going to raise this number, and I'm going to tell you why I would want to raise this number. Now this number is your f-stop. What f-stop does is it works in stops, and as you turn the button, you get from f2.8 to 3.2 to 3.5 to 4. So what this number does is, the lower this number is, the wider the lens will open. Essentially doing the same thing as raising your ISO. But when you have this number on its lowest number, that this 2.8 is the lowest that this lens can go. So if it's at the lowest number, you'll see that not everything in the photo is in focus. So you don't have a grain or a noise issue when you are raising or dropping your f-stop, but you have a focus issue. So look at my finger from the front of the picture to the back of the picture on f2.8. So as you can see, as I move my finger towards the camera or towards this cat, then my finger starts becoming into focus. But as soon as I move my finger towards the elephant at the back, then my finger goes completely out of focus. That is because the lens is wide open, and because it's so wide open, it does not focus on anything behind the subject. It only focuses on the subject. Now when I move this towards, let's say f22 just to be silly, then I have to increase my ISO to get a perfectly exposed photo. But now look at the elephant. Now it's in focus. And look at my finger. So no matter where I put my finger, it will now stay in focus throughout this photo. And if I'm going to take a photo like this, it will be perfectly exposed, but everything will be in focus. And if I change it back to where it was, at f2.8, I will take a photo and everything will be perfectly exposed, but nothing behind this cat will be in focus. So that is your f-stop. Now f-stop, the size of the lens opening, small lens opening, big focus, up to right into infinity you can focus. But the bigger your lens opens, the shallower your depth of field becomes, and less of everything behind your subject will be in focus. All right, so now that we understand ISO and we understand f-stop, let's move over to shutter speed. Now on our shutter speed, the lower the shutter speed, the slower the shutter will close. So your shutter will open and it will close. And if your shutter is fast, you've got a fast shutter speed, your shutter will open and close quickly. And what that does is the same as this. If this number is low, it will let in a lot of light. If this number is low, it will let in a lot of light. The higher this number goes, the less light it will let in. The higher this number goes, the less light it will let in. So, why would both of these do the same thing? Because this number deals with your close and your far focus. So everything in front is in focus, everything in the back is out of focus. But if I raise the number, everything is in focus, but you've got less light. Now this doesn't do anything to your focus, but what it does is it gets you a crisp, clear photo, or it gets you a blurry photo. So the slower your shutter speed goes, that's a very slow shutter speed. Let's go to 1 second just to show you exactly what I mean. The slower your shutter speed goes, the more motion blur you'll see. Now look at my hand in this photo. Now that's on a 1 second shutter, and I'm going to take a photo like that. Can you see what this photo looks like? There's so much motion blur you can't even see my hand because the shutter was open for a full second before it closed. Now let's move the shutter up, which means to perfectly expose we have to come down with our f-stop, and now it's still underexposed, so we have no other choice than to raise the ISO. See how these three work together? When the one goes up, the other has to come down. Now we've got a perfectly exposed photo, but I'm going to do the same thing with my hand. And you already see a lot less motion blur. So let's take a photo. And there you can see almost my whole hand, but there's still some motion blur. So the less motion blur you want, the faster your shutter speed has to be. But if we have a fast shutter speed, again, we have no other choice than to raise the ISO. And if we go to high numbers like this, we will introduce some grainy dots or some noise into, digital noise into our photo. So let's do the hand thing again. Now you see a lot less motion blur. Let's take a photo. And if you look at my hand now, there's a lot less motion blur than in the previous picture. All right, so moving to ISO on its lowest setting that your camera would handle. I would leave it there always, and just remember that if I need to increase my light, I would increase this number, but only if I'm desperate for light. And if I'm going to take photos in a manual setting, what I would do is I would only work with my shutter speed and my f-stop. So shutter speed and f-stop is what I'll be working with. So if I work with fast-moving objects, I want to move the shutter speed fast. But if I work with static subjects like these little big 5 African animals, then I can go as low as 1 second and it'll still be perfectly exposed, as long as I now make sure that I increase my depth of field so that more of the animals are in focus. So there's a plus and a minus to every one of these settings. If you're going to use slower shutter speeds, you're going to have to increase your f-stop, which means more of your subject will be in focus. So, or increase the shutter speed so it's faster. You're going to have to decrease your f-stop, which means not so much of your subject will be in focus. And if both of these two are exactly where you want them, but the photo is still a little bit dark, that's when we go to ISO to get this perfect exposure on the line. So I really hope that you've enjoyed this video, and if you did, please go below and hit the like and subscribe button, and don't forget to ring the bell to see more of our future videos coming up. Stay safe and stay well.